Hello, my name is Alex, and I have been a part of Discovery for about 4 years. I want to welcome you here this morning. We are glad to have you part of the community, and let's worship together.
Sing nothing. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Oh, unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. In the darkness, you were waiting without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets, till that stone was moved for good. For the Lamb had conquered death, and the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe. For the souls of all who come to the Father are restored, and the church of Christ was born, and the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not fade. By His blood and in His name, in His freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Oh, sing praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of kings. Praise forever to the King of kings.
Oh, how high would I climb mountains if the mountains were where you hide? And oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you graced the other side. And oh, how long have I chased rivers from lonely seas to where they rise? Against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. I would search and stop at nothing. You're just not that hard to find. I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you when the valley's all the same. No less God within the shadows. No less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Extend the path from where you feel pressed on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinner's path. Oh, how fast would you come running if just a shadow moved through the night? Trace my steps through all my failure and walk me out the other side. For who could dare ascend that mountain, that valley hill called Calvary? But for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. shadows. No less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, oh, wherever I walk through, wherever I am, they can move mountains wherever I stand. If ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent. Wherever I walk through, wherever I am, they can move mountains wherever I stand. If ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent. And from the gravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upwards from a deep but empty grave. I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows. No less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Father God, the lyrics of this song, it's such a beautiful picture of your love for us. And I just want to thank you today for your steadfastness, your constantness. The fact that you're the same today, tomorrow, yesterday. And you can see this world as a mess, God. But you are no less good. That even when things look really bleak, that we always have a reason to worship you just because of how good you are intrinsically. And God, I pray that we won't stop there, just resting in your goodness, but we can be motivated by your love and your compassion, that you can change us, change our hearts. You can unify us, that you can do what seems impossible and bring peace. God, you are so good no matter what happens. And I pray that your goodness can cut through all the mess. And we can be filled by your Spirit. We can be encouraged by your hope. We can be motivated by your love. And we can do it all without losing sight of you, that we don't try and do it on our own power, but we rely on you for your goodness. So God, we pray that you invade this place, that you invade our hearts, that you invade our minds, and teach us to care about what you care about. Break our hearts for what breaks yours. And use us, God. Use us to spread your good news and help us to see it and take hold of it in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Good morning, Discovery. We just heard this song, and part of the lyrics that stuck in my mind are the one that say, "No less God within the shadow, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. Whatever I walk through, whatever I am. Your name can move mountains, wherever I stand. And I think, considering what's going on in our city and the country right now, and this time of darkness, it's so powerful to know that God is with us. And He will make a difference in who we are, our race, where we come from. Because He sent His Son, Jesus, to sacrifice His life for all the humankind. So right now we would like to invite you to have communion with us.
Communion is a way in which we can remember Jesus' sacrifice. The bread represents His body broken for us, and the juice represents His blood. So we're gonna ask you to take your elements and to have communion with us.
Now we would like to take this moment and invite you to pray for someone in your life that is having a hard time during this pandemic and with everything what's going on with the social injustice. So if you can think in a neighbor, a relative, a family member, or someone in your workplace that you can think and pray for it. We would like to take this moment too and pray for some of our local partners. If you can think of one, you can pray for Broomfield Fish, and that there can be more volunteers to help them and to provide for the needs of the people who seek for their help. Hola Discovery, my name is Vera, and now we're gonna continue our service with offering. And we know that this has been a difficult times for a lot of families because of the pandemic. So we are very grateful for the offers that we have been receiving during this time. And thank you for help us to help the people who are in need in our community and to keep serving our global partners. If you would like to offer, this is the information about how you can do it.
So I know it's sad because of the virus we need to stay home, but guess what? We're going to have VBS.
Rebecca, what's BBS?
Oh, VBS is a summer vacation Bible school.
And you don't need to go to church because we have Zoom meetings.
And we're gonna have games. We're gonna
Have sing
and we're gonna have fun, most importantly.
and sign up before June 15th.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
We will continue with our announcements, and we would like to invite you to our worship night. This event is gonna happen on June 15 at 7 p.m. in our Facebook page, and it's gonna be a live event. I hope you can join us.
And to continue with our service, we'd like to invite all our children to be a part of the storyteller. Girls,
Venga.
Rebecca, Vera, come here.
Mommy.
Okay.
Daddy.
So this morning, Randy Smith is gonna share with us the story. Let's check it out.
Hi kids, it's Mr. Randy. I'm here to tell you today's story. Today's story is an Old Testament story about David and Goliath. Do you know who David was? That's right, he was one of the first kings of Israel. Good job. But before David was king, long before he was king, he was a shepherd that looked after his father's sheep. He was also the youngest of 7 brothers. Are any of you the youngest or have older brothers and sisters? Yeah, sometimes it's tough to be the youngest. Sometimes our older brothers and sisters see us differently than we want to be seen, don't they? Has this ever happened to you? Yeah, I'm sure it has. Well, that is the case with David and his brothers. Sometimes David was seen as too young to be part of important things. But many times, it doesn't matter what's on the outside, it's only what's on the inside that matters. And we'll see this in today's story. David was one of God's people, the Israelites. The Israelites were getting ready to fight an enemy army called the Philistines. David's brothers were soldiers in Israel's army. They were camped with King Saul and other soldiers on a hill, and the Philistines were camped on another hill across the valley. A mighty hero named Goliath was on the Philistine camp. He was from a place called Gath. He was more than 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore bronze armor that was 125 pounds. On his legs he wore bronze guards, he carried a bronze javelin, and had a huge spear. In fact, if Goliath was in this room, his head would touch the ceiling. Goliath was huge, wasn't he? Well, Goliath stood there and he shouted at the soldiers of Israel. He said, "Why don't you come out here and line up and fight me? I'm a Philistine. You are servants of Saul. Choose one of your men. Have him come down and face me. If he's able to fight and defeat me, we will serve you. But if I defeat him, you will become our slaves and serve us." Goliath continued, "This day I dare the soldiers of Israel to come down and battle with me and fight against me." Saul and the whole army heard what the Philistines said, and they were terrified. Goliath yelled at King Saul and his army for 40 days. King Saul and his men were afraid. They were used to fighting together, not one-on-one, and nobody wanted to fight Goliath by himself. How would you feel if an enemy army wanted to fight you with a huge giant? Would you be afraid? Yes, I would be too. Well, one day David came to camp to bring his brother some food and find out some news about his brothers. David's father Jesse was worried about his sons, and he sent David to make sure they were okay. When David came to the Israelite camp, he heard the giant yelling. This made David very angry what Goliath was saying about God and the Israelites. He couldn't believe what he was saying. And David couldn't believe that no one would fight Goliath. David knew that God was stronger than any giant, and David knew in his heart that God would help the Israelites win. One of the soldiers told King Saul about what David was saying, and King Saul sent for David. And David went and saw the king, and when he saw King Saul, he said, "I will fight Goliath." King Saul says, "You can't do that. You're just a boy." But David answered, "When I was taking care of my father's sheep, I had to kill a lion and I had to kill a bear. And I knew God protected me and helped me defeat the lion and the bear and helped me protect my father's sheep." So Saul agreed to let him fight Goliath. But King Saul liked David and did not want to see him hurt. So he gave him his armor and his sword. He said, "Try these on." And David tried them on and he walked around. He says, "I can't wear these. I can't walk around with these things on. I can't fight. I'm not used to them." So he took the armor off and gave the sword back to the king. So King Saul said, "Go and let the Lord be with you." So David went outside and he found 5 smooth stones, kind of like this. And he went and got his sling. Do you know what a sling is? A sling is 2 pieces of string with a leather patch tied to it. You put the stone in the leather patch and you swing it over your head, and at the right time you let the string go to throw the stone. It's not very easy to do, but that's what David had, and he was ready to go fight Goliath. When Goliath saw David, he was very angry. He thought the biggest and toughest soldier in King Saul's army was coming to fight him. But this was just a boy. He didn't have a spear, he didn't have armor, he didn't have anything. All he had was a sling. So Goliath yelled at him, "Come here and I will kill you." And David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, who you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down. This very day I give the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know there's a God in Israel. And those gathered here will know that it's not by spear or by sword that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. As the giant came closer, David ran towards him. He put the stone in his sling, and he threw it, and he let it go. And he hit Goliath right in the forehead, and Goliath crashed to the ground, and he died right there. When the Philistine army saw what had happened, they were afraid, and they started to run away. King Saul and the army went after them, and they defeated them. David trusted in God to help him, and God used David to help them beat the Philistines. David beat a guy who was much larger and scarier than he was. Why do you think that is? That's right. It's because David put his trust in God. David did not put his trust in his fear or his abilities. David put his trust in God, that God would help him, and God helped David win. Have you ever had a time when you've had a big problem or didn't know what to do? Yes, me too. David had a big problem, but David put his trust that God was bigger than any problem. That is because God cares about us and wants to fight our battles. We may not have to fight a Goliath, but we all have times where we're nervous or scared or do not know what to do. And we can remember that little David and his stones defeated a Goliath because they trusted in God. And we can talk to God anytime and give him our troubles. All we have to do is tell him why we're scared, why we need him, and God will be there and he will listen and he will help us. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's story. Until next time, this is Mr. Randy, and we'll have a good day.
Hi, my name is Gareth Unruh, Juvenile Justice Ministry Liaison and local partner to Discovery Church. And I work with our Juvenile Justice Ministry and in Denver Area Youth for Christ. And I just want to give you guys an update during this time. It's definitely been challenging. And so we're so appreciative of your prayers and how you guys have partnered with us financially and through praying for us. Some challenges that we're experiencing is there's a lot of staff that we work with in the state that are extremely overwhelmed and really struggling during this time, just dealing with the lack of resources and young people inside. We have not been able to be inside. We do have a few small groups and church services that are happening over different video meetings and things like that. We are able to call and follow up with young people that we're personally mentoring. There's young people that are asking for us to continue to invest in their spiritual lives as well as meet the needs for their families outside. As you can imagine, there's a lot of concern around families that are outside that aren't necessarily safe. They are unhoused right now. And so we're trying to meet physical needs as well as anything practically with those families. So thank you for those of you that have helped with that. Also, just be praying for our staff. As Denver Youth for Christ, we continue to try to reach out to those that we have not heard from. A lot of our young people, even as we're making phone calls to check in, it's been really challenging. Phone calls are hit and miss. And so we just continue to ask for God's wisdom and ask you to support us in praying for that as well. As we move into more face-to-face, we just ask for your prayers for wisdom around that as we continue to want to meet the needs of our most marginalized and those young people that are furthest out. As you can imagine, the racial inequality that's happening around our nation right now too is really a challenge. And so we ask you to be praying with us, to be standing and coming alongside our young people that we love and care about, and we know the Father cares about as well. Thank you so much for your investment. Thank you so much for your prayers.
Hi, I'm Fred Stricker.
And I'm Cindy Stricker.
And we work with a really fun one-on-one tutoring program that's faith-based called Whiz Kids. We serve 19 under-resourced, underachieving kids in Broomfield, and we have 19 incredible tutors that work with those kids. As with most things in March, our program came to a very abrupt halt. We didn't get to have any closure with the kids at all, but we don't want to focus on that. We want to focus on a couple of positive things that God blessed us with this year, one of which was an incredible Christmas party that was catered by a life group from Discovery. Kids had a ball and they were really excited to receive their 2 books that they each received from the Advent Conspiracy Program at Discovery. Discovery's been an amazing partner for us, and we so appreciate the support that we get from them. Because the program ended so abruptly, we didn't get to have any time to say goodbye to the kids. So Cindy's going to share a brief story about her little girl.
Soon after we had to stop because of the virus, I still had some books for my little girl that I had ordered for her and some workbooks we'd been working in. So I dropped them off at her house one day and rang the doorbell and backed away, and they answered and she gave me a big smile. I also was able to give her some things I had ordered that she received yesterday, and I got a picture of her with a big smile with those things that I'd sent her. So that's been great.
We were also blessed with an incredible fundraiser through the COVID virus. We exceeded our overall goal for the Denver metro area of $100,000. And part of that was because of the generosity of folks like you and Discovery. We are looking forward to next year. We just have no idea what next year is going to look like because the school districts don't have things in place yet. But we are looking for volunteers. We just can't tell you exactly what things will look like, but we'd love for you to come and be with us and help us with the program. Thanks so much to you all and to Discovery for the incredible support you give us.
Thank you.
Hi, Discovery Church. This is Robin. I'm the Family and Community Manager with Hope Kids, and I know you guys have seen me before, but I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you to the rest of the Hope Kids Colorado team. So we have Howie, he is our Executive Director, and Lisa, our Program Director, and they both are going to share a little bit of an update with you.
Yes, hey Discovery. We are just so excited to have this opportunity to share with you what we've been doing in our world. Since about the middle of March, we have had to move to all virtual events after the COVID hit. And we are averaging about 40 to 50 virtual events. So we are just filling our calendars with fun events for our families that they can join at any time. We've done virtual field trips, we've done chats with sports celebrities, we've done story times and crafts and cooking events and all kinds of things. So we're always looking for volunteers and people from the community who would like to support us by putting on a Zoom event. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out to Robin and she can give you all the details.
Hey Discovery, we've loved connecting with you and your community over the last few months, and we'd love for you just to support us through prayer, and not just us as staff, but our families, and specifically the health and the safety of our families. They're always going through a lot, and things are definitely heightened right now as we're navigating everything that is COVID and how to engage with them. So just continue to pray for their health and safety. But also, we'd love for you to pray for wisdom for us as a team as we start to think about what connecting with our families in person might look like. That is what we love. That's what our mission was initially created for, that type of interaction, and we really want to get back to that. So just pray for wisdom around how to do that safely and in a way that we feel comfortable and can get back to the deeper meaning of that interaction. And then lastly, just pray for resources. We need financial resources to execute our program. And then we need people resources, event partners and volunteers and people that can join us in engaging with our families and helping create these meaningful opportunities of connection. And one thing I'll just mention is, we have our golf tournament coming up, and there'll be a lot of people coming out to Bear Dance down in Larkspur to play golf and support Hope Kids. And just pray that those folks will hear more about our mission and at the end of the day be more deeply connected to what we're doing and be willing to support us. And we have a few spots left. If there's anybody that wants to join us, we'd love to have you come out.
Hi folks, Hey, really glad you're joining us. This is our summer series, and we're really early in a series called The Better News. Typically at our church, over the course of a summer, we take one book of the Bible, and we just slowly make our way through it. And quite honestly, our favorite times of this is when we're going through a gospel, because we love on a regular basis to simply follow right along with the life of Jesus. So this series called The Better News, we're focusing on the Gospel of Mark. And today is week 3, so we're in chapter 3. So grab a Bible, because I'll be reading 3 different sections of chapter 3. There'll be some that I'm leaving out for time that you can chase on your own. Actually, chapter 3 has a whole theme attached to it where everything's pretty nicely tied in. I'll get to some of that theme here. But we're going to start right now in Mark chapter 3, starting in verse 1. 3 scenes today. Let's look at the first scene. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." And then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger, and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. And then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians on how they might kill Jesus. That's scene 1, and we're just going to spend a bit of time in scene 1. It's set. Its location is basically the New Testament version of a church building called a synagogue. So you can chase this on your own if you're really interested in the Bible nerd stuff, but basically Jerusalem had a temple, which is where they really believe God did most of God's work. But in the outskirts, if you were living far away from Jerusalem, for example, this was set around 100 miles from Jerusalem, then you'd have these synagogues, these little outpost churches. And so Jesus would spend time in the synagogues trying to help the religious leaders figure out who he was. So there's 3 people in this story. Let's talk about each one just a little bit. The first group of people is the Pharisees. If you're not familiar with the Pharisees, in many ways in the New Testament, they're really cast as the bad guys. You know, in movies and stories we like, there's good guys and bad guys. There's no question that even though the Pharisees, I think, were probably a pretty sincere group of people, they really had let power go to their head. They really were convinced that they were the way that people could engage God, that they were the judges of how to engage God and how to not engage God. It's not quite accurate to call them a church leader. They were more than that. They were like equal parts faith leader, politician, and mafia. They had kind of a thug element to them as well. They really were strong-arm, heavy-handed on their power. But they weren't just religious. They also had a strong political kind of leadership as well. And what's interesting about these guys is as Jesus is in the synagogue, these Pharisees, these religious people who are at church, really have no interest in what Jesus has to say. They're only watching Jesus for what he's about to do. And they're hoping to catch Jesus in a trap. And what trap are they hoping to catch Jesus in? Are they hoping that maybe he'll preach heresy, or maybe he'll ask people for money so he can have a luxury private donkey? No, none of those things. They're looking for him to heal somebody on the Sabbath, which is a violation of their understanding of how to be faithful to God. So they're setting him up for a trap. The second person in this story is Jesus. You know Jesus, or if you don't know Jesus personally, you know of Jesus. Good guy, healer, died for our sins, rose from the dead, Son of God. One of the most beautiful expressions of who God is. This is Jesus. And here's what's interesting. Jesus is the guy that performed a healing on the Sabbath. And we just have to dig into Sabbath a little bit. What's the Sabbath? The Sabbath is the day of the week where we don't do any work at all. I'm just going to pause, and particularly if you're watching this and you've got some people with you, I'm literally going to stare at you for 20 seconds while you ask yourselves this question. When you think of Sabbath, what's the first word that comes to mind? When you think of Sabbath, what's the first word that comes to mind? Typically when we think of Sabbath, the first word that comes to mind, of course, is rest. And if you said to each other, rest or taking a break or some form of rest, absolutely, that's probably what Sabbath is most famous for. It really is about rest. But underneath rest, I'm going to invite you to start thinking about Sabbath in another lens. And instead of first thinking about Sabbath as rest, I'm going to invite you to first think about Sabbath through the lens of control. Sabbath is about you and I stepping off the treadmill of our work as an act of worship, remembering and being weekly reminded that God is in control and that we are not in control. Or another way to say it, one of the reasons people practice the Sabbath in the Bible times is the faithful recognition that God is at work when we are not at work. That's why the Pharisees were so hung up on Jesus doing work on the Sabbath, because no human being is supposed to do any work on the Sabbath, because it's a recognition that God alone works on the Sabbath and we rest. The sun still rises on the Sabbath. Everything is as it should be still on the Sabbath. God is sovereign. And particularly in our modern Western culture, some form of Sabbath is such a good experience for you and I, because we just are naturally people that when we get anxious, we like to be in control. So a regular experience of intentionally stepping out of control and remembering that God is in control, it's really good for our souls. In fact, I would say the way to rest is through the recognition that God's in control and we are not. So Sabbath is first about control. We rest in the knowledge that God is in control and we are not. So we don't work on the Sabbath, God does work on the Sabbath. And here's where things get really interesting. Jesus heals on the Sabbath. Now, all through the book of Mark, Jesus' identity as the Son of God is generally hidden. Mark writes it in a way, and sometimes even Jesus will say to somebody, don't tell anybody who I am. Oftentimes, someone will come to Jesus for a healing and he'll heal them, and then he'll say, hey, this is just between you and me. Don't you go telling other people that I healed you. It's like the secrecy in Mark, that Mark and Jesus don't want us to know that he's God until he's ready to reveal it on the cross when he dies for our sins. But there's all these hints all the way through Mark. And right here in Mark 3, there's this little hint where the only one qualified to work on the Sabbath works on the Sabbath. A hint that Jesus is God by healing. But the Pharisees, because they're obstinate and they've already made their mind up, they don't even notice that God is in their presence. And so Mark records that after this happened, they decided to plot for a way to kill Jesus. Now, before we move to the third person in the story, just a quick question while we're cooking around on Sabbath. What do you need to trust God with right now? What are you trying to control right now? It's true that since the Bible times, we're not typically in a habit of taking a rigid 24-hour period the way they did in the Bible, although, frankly, it's a really good practice. But many of us really struggle with that practice. But you can Sabbath right now. You can take even just a few minutes and simply consider Sabbath through the lens of control and just ask yourself right now, is there something I'm trying to control that really it's time for me to trust God to control? That's a Sabbath experience. All right, third category of person is the man with a shriveled hand. When I was first doing this sermon, I actually wrote down the man who wanted to be healed. But I went back and checked the story, and Mark doesn't give us any indication about what this guy wanted or didn't want. And maybe you're thinking, well, of course he wanted to be healed. He had a shriveled hand. Why would he not want to be healed? Sure, it's entirely possible that Jesus made him stand up, and Jesus said, stretch out your hand, and he stretched out his hand, and then his hand was healed. It's entirely possible that the man said, man, Jesus, thank you so much, because I've got these expenses and now I can pick up a second job as a masonry, as a bricklayer. Now that I have both hands, I can get more income. Jesus, really help me out. That's great. But Mark doesn't indicate anything about this guy. It could also be, I often like to play with scripture. I like to be disrupted about my assumptions. What if this guy was a scribe? What if he spent his full-time occupation writing with his hand? A scribe, for example, would work in a synagogue or a temple. They'd take old scrolls that are getting faded and had holes in them, and they'd write word for word onto a fresh scroll because they didn't have photocopiers or printers. So they'd pay people to simply transcribe an old scroll into a fresh scroll. Full-time job for some people, a scribe. And the reason in the Bible, just as an aside, that the scribes are listed as experts in the Bible is because they spend their whole time reading it and writing it out. Maybe this guy was a scribe. Maybe Jesus healed his right hand. And this guy said to Jesus, hey, very kind of you to heal me, but I'm left-handed. Doesn't make any difference to me. I don't care. Now, you might be saying, what in the world? Like, why are you playing with a text like that? What does it matter? You'll be amazed at how often we bring our own assumptions to the text that aren't really in there. And the reason I'm being facetious right now and tongue-in-cheek about this guy, of course he was probably happy to be healed, is the Bible doesn't have any indication about this guy. Mark really writes that he was really a prop in a larger story. And any time we read in the Bible that Jesus healed somebody, our natural human interaction is to want Jesus to heal somebody we love. I bet in my couple of decades of being a pastor, the number one request when people ask me to pray is to pray for somebody they love who needs healing. And listen, every time somebody asks me to do that, I do it. If you ask me to pray for healing for you or your loved one, I will pray for healing for you or your loved one. I get it. The deep desire that somebody we love be healed is real. But we have to be so careful when we read all the healings in the Bible and we put all this expectation on Jesus to heal us or our loved ones, when so often Jesus healed somebody in the Bible not so much for that individual, but for a larger kingdom point. And in Mark 3, it would be a mistake for us to say, this man desperately wanted healing, he asked Jesus, Jesus healed him. No, what actually happened, Jesus and the Pharisees were in a power showdown. And to defeat the Pharisees and to reveal secretly and sneakily that Jesus is in fact God, he chooses this man in need of healing almost like a prop. Not that Jesus is manipulative, not that he's an exploiter. He's just using this man for this larger understanding to get in the Pharisees' face. It's like he's healing this guy right under the Pharisees' nose just to irritate them. One of the things about Jesus, he loves to irritate religious snobs. And as somebody who has gone through seasons of religious snobbery, it's one of Jesus' great gifts to us that he breaks down our religious snobbery. So that's the thing about this situation. And the question we have to ask is, if you've been a follower of Jesus, if you've been religious for some time now, the momentum for us to be pulled toward religious snobbery, to be pulled toward where we really think we know God and the way God operates and what God thinks, and that actual situation can blind us from when we see God right in our presence. For me, it's one of the things that haunts me the most, because I've been a follower of Jesus for several decades. I'm so often haunted by the idea, what if God is working right in front of me, but because I have my preconceived notions about God, I'm missing the work of God? What blocked the Pharisees from seeing God were these preconceived notions, this stubbornness, hate for sure, their arrogance. And just to circle back to Sabbath once again before we move on to our second story, if Sabbath is about control and trusting God to control and letting go of control, then the longer we follow Jesus, the more vital it is that we Sabbath on a regular basis, so that our hearts can be open to God constantly realigning and working us to stay freshly aware of God's presence. Okay, scene number 2, super quick. One verse, Mark 3:7. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. Kind of related to the Sabbath idea, this is our second simple idea. This is where Mark helps us to notice a pattern that Jesus practiced all through his life. He would have an intense confrontation with a group of people, and then after that intense confrontation, he would retreat into the wilderness. Sometimes he would retreat by himself. He would use solitude or silence, which are rich spiritual practices in the life of the church. Sometimes he'd retreat with his friends, oftentimes just 3 of the disciples. Sometimes he would retreat with all 12 of the disciples. But as you read through Mark, from now to the rest of Mark, you'll start to notice intense confrontation, retreat. Intense time of work, retreat. Pretty good rhythm for the rest of us, don't you think? Sometimes, in order to connect with God, you have to go and have time by yourself. And I know what I've noticed in my life and what our family's been talking about is when we were in that era where we were really in intense isolation, really locked down in our houses, it was so difficult for us to find solitude. We really had to fight for it. I remember several weeks, like 8 weeks into isolation, there was a moment where everyone was out of the house except for me for 20 minutes. 20 minutes, I remember it. And just the idea that I got to be in a space by myself with no one else, it's like my soul was so thirsty for solitude. Other times you need to retreat with people, but this idea of intense work and then retreat, it's connected to this idea of control and trust, intense work and retreat. So I'll just pause and ask you right now, where are you on that cycle? Are you starting an intense project? Have you been doing all this intense work and no retreat? What could you do this week? What would it look like to get your calendar out right now and just calendar just even half an hour or an hour or half a day just for some solitude or some soul-giving life with some friends? So Jesus practiced this intense confrontation and then retreat. And I just want to point out that this is a literary structure that Mark uses, again, for our Bible nerds, where it's intense confrontation and retreat all the way to the cross, where Jesus confronts Pilate, and then he confronts Satan, and he confronts the principalities and powers, and he dies for us on the cross. That's his most intense work that he does. And then what happens next? He retreats. He takes a Sabbath rest in the tomb. I don't want there to be any confusion. Jesus was dead. I'm not making some accusation that Jesus was just asleep. No, he was dead. But spiritually and metaphorically, Jesus was taking his Sabbath. He was releasing control to the Father, knowing that the Father was still at work and he could rest, his work was done. And then the Father, sure enough, did his life-giving, resurrecting work in Jesus, rose him from the dead. It's powerful. It's amazing. Okay. Scene 3. When they, verse 8, by the way, if you're following along. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around the Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him, for he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and they cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. Okay, just a couple of quick thoughts on this passage. First of all, Mark lists some cities and towns around where Jesus is, and I mapped them out. People traveled from 60 miles away to 100 miles away to come and hear Jesus. You talk about absolute spiritual desperation and physical desperation. You see that people here were bringing diseased people or people with diseases coming and begging Jesus to heal them. And I don't mean to harp on the point, but I think you'll also notice that Mark does not mention in here that Jesus stopped and healed them all. We all want healing, and Jesus is the healer. It's true that Jesus does physical healing. What is also true is that Jesus does not heal as many people as we wish he would. And I don't know why. I just think that God has a different view of life and death than us, a different view of healing and sickness and wellness, and that even in the midst of our deepest pain, God is present with us. So these people, they travel from miles around, 60 miles, 100 miles. You talk about people on donkey or on foot. That's a long journey. It reminds me of several years ago, I had an opportunity to go to Haiti on a trip, and it was an incredible privilege because I got to bring somebody I worked for. This was, like 20 years ago now. And the man I worked for, Mark, who's a dear friend of mine, he's a marriage and family therapist. And so we went to Haiti to do marriage seminars for Haitians. it was so fascinating. Mark took the lead. I taught a little bit, but really Mark, because he was the therapist, he did most of the teaching. Mark's also a pastor. Mark, quick shout out to you if you happen to ever see this. And boy, we were in Unament, a part of Haiti that's very remote. It's on the border of Dominican Republic. And we drive into Unament, and I had experienced grinding poverty in the developing world before, but it's always a shock when you drive into Haiti and you just see the conditions of the village and the challenges that people have. It's unbelievable. And the Haitian pastor, he brought 2 translators over with him, and that's when we figured out that nobody in the area spoke Creole, which is what Haitians speak, and English. So in the Dominican Republic, people speak Spanish. So the pastor brought over one person who spoke Creole and Spanish, and then another person who spoke Spanish and English. And if you've ever been in another country where you have to work with a translator, which is something I've gotten to do several times, it's a challenge to speak, particularly if you're teaching or something through a translator. Imagine speaking through 2 translators. And so Mark, my dear friend, had never taught cross-culturally before, and I had. And so I said, hey, Mark, just a little tip. I mean, he's my boss and he's the expert. I'm not trying to lead him, but I just said, hey, don't even try for humor, Mark, because through 1 translator, it's a challenge. Through 2 translators, it's just not going to work. So, boy, the church building was packed with people, these couples, many of them, like I remember the front row was just full of naked breastfeeders. Eye contact, never been more important. It was crazy. And so we're getting up there to teach, and Mark is teaching the 7 habits of a healthy couple. Just very simple things about respect for each other and space for each other, and just simple moments of intimacy and things like this. And he gets through his 4th point out of the 7 tips. And he says, I'd just like to pause for questions. Does anyone have a question? And this lady puts her hand up, and she says her question in Creole, and it comes through from Creole to Spanish, and then Spanish to English. And here's the question. She said, if my husband didn't try to go out to get work 2 days ago, and then yesterday he didn't try to go out to get work, and he hasn't tried to go out and get work today, and I haven't eaten in 3 days, do I still have to have sex with him? That was the question. Mark is a quick-witted guy, and before he could stop his filter, he simply said to her, oh, if I had $1 for every time I've heard that question, because of course he's never heard that question before. And before he could stop it, I tried to intercede with the translators. I'm like, no! And I watched that English idiom be translated through Spanish into Creole, and then you got to watch about 200 really confused Haitians like, what? That's weird. And then of course we had the Haitian pastor come up and help us address what was really for her a very serious question. But before we started this seminar and all the challenges that we faced with it, the pastor said to us, hey, do you have a prize to give away? We said, yeah, we've got several. We actually brought some gifts and things. And he said, okay, let's give a prize to the couple who has walked the furthest for this seminar. Great, we said. So at the beginning of the seminar, before we really got into it, I was out there saying, okay, everyone, we have a prize. Who came the furthest? And people were saying, I walked 4 hours. And we're like, man, you walked 4 hours for this thing? The winner, as people are sharing their different times, the winner had walked, husband and wife had walked 18 hours to come to this village, to Unament, because they had heard that some Christians were going to help them with their marriage. And it was at that moment that we realized just how serious this work we were doing. Like in America, there's marriage seminars everywhere. There's marriage therapy everywhere. And here we are, just a couple of people. There are 3 of us coming to teach, Mark and Marge and myself. 3 of us coming to teach people on some tips on marriage, and people are deciding that there's something they're so hungry for, they're walking 18 hours. This story, that's what it reminds me of. These people who are so desperate for Jesus, they'll do anything. And as you're reading through Mark, one of the things you can do is you can look at the desperation of the people and look at your own desperation. And look at the great lengths that people go to be around Jesus, and look at our own desperation. What's clear in this story is that people are desperate for Jesus' physical touch, and they're desperate for spiritual transformation. That's why at the end of this story we see the impure spirits crying out and declaring who God is. And so I just want to remind us that an appropriate response to Jesus is spiritual desperation. And yet, in this country, we can just so battle apathy and comfort and security. And I think that's just a unique challenge for us in this country. Okay, now the final scene. This is not the final scene in this chapter. It's the final scene we'll be doing in the message. And then you can chase the rest of the chapter on your own. Verse 13. Jesus went up on a mountainside, and he called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach, and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, I don't quite know how to pronounce that, which means sons of thunder; Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. This is our final section we're going to cover in the next 6 minutes or so. Okay, a couple of things. There's only one other occasion in the book of Mark where Jesus does his work in a synagogue, in a church. The rest of the book of Mark, he skips church and he's doing all his kingdom work in the field. He's just out in public. He's out with his disciples. He's avoiding the religious locations, and he's spending most of his time out in the field. Discovery, we've always been a church that's gathered and scattered. And the fact is, the longer we're scattered, the more keen we are to gather. I know for myself, the longer I'm filming these messages on video and I'm sitting with my family with a TV on Sunday, the more I'm longing just to be together with you guys and just to hear each other's voices. I think honestly, I'll play my cards right away. It's been a struggle for me to preach to a camera. I just miss interacting with people. But the bigger struggle for me is I miss singing with people and I miss communion with people. It's so powerful for me when I see the different kinds of people taking the body and the blood, just the reminder of the diversity of the body of Christ. And just to be surrounded by human voices declaring the glory of God, it's been a really struggle. I can't wait to gather. And so if you're missing gathering, I want you to know I feel that, and I feel the same way. But also, let's not lose this. Jesus did most of his kingdom work while scattered. Jesus did most of his kingdom work while being away from the religious building, the synagogue. There's nothing wrong with missing the building. I'm not saying if you're missing it, there's something wrong with you. I miss it too. But at this time, this is our opportunity to look for the power of the gospel being scattered, and it's scattered through everyday people like you and I. And so these 12. Here's the thing about the 12. First of all, why 12? Why not 15? Why not 8? Is that some kind of leadership principle that 12 is the right number? No. In the Old Testament, the people of God were oriented around 12 tribes. In the New Testament, Jesus intentionally chooses 12 people as another little secret hint that he is God, and he's orienting the 12 now not around tribes. You're no longer born into it because you're Jewish. You're now part of it if you're following Jesus. And so the 12 apostles are metaphorically representative of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, here's what's fun about these 12, and Mark really highlights this more than most of the other gospel writers. Jesus was a nickname giver. Jesus loved to give people nicknames. Let's take a look at this. Simon, he nicknamed him Peter. Those of you who are Dwayne Johnson fans, Peter means the rock. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, he gave them the nickname sons of thunder. Not that Zebedee had a temper problem, but that James and John had a temper problem. They were volatile people, so Jesus nicknamed them the sons of thunder. Then he has Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas. By the way, John is the one that reminds us that Thomas's nickname is Didymus, which means twin. And legend has it, history says that the reason Thomas's nickname was twin is because he looked physically the most like Jesus. Okay, let's see, where are we? James, the son of Alphaeus. Okay, Thaddeus. Thaddeus, his birth name was, let me get this right here, Judas. And so Luke is the one that tells us that Thaddeus' birth name is Judas. Thaddeus is a nickname that means big-hearted. He was a big-hearted guy. Simon the Zealot. Bible nerds, you'd naturally think, oh, well, he was in the Zealot party. Nope. The Zealot affiliation didn't even get going till 70 AD. Jesus is naming him the Zealot, what's that, 4.5 decades before the official political party got going. The Zealot, by all accounts, is a nickname of Simon because he was kind of a let's get after it kind of guy. And then the most interesting of all, I think, is this final nickname, Iscariot, Judas Iscariot. A couple of interesting things. Judas is always named last on every disciple list ever. If you go through your Bible, he's always the last one named. Almost always, the gospel writers, Mark does it too, says the one who betrayed Jesus. So Iscariot could be a last name. Possibly when you dig into the original language, it could be showing us where he was from. But another possibility that scholars chase is that Iscariot has to do with a certain kind of knife that an assassin carries. And the Iskars are a group of people who would assassinate people with a knife. And so Iscariot means the up-close assassin, the one that gets close to you before doing you in. So a lot of people say Jesus named Judas Iscariot as his nickname. Interesting mix of people, lots of volatility. And here's the thing about them, is these were ordinary, everyday people. Jesus did not go to the religious leaders to choose his followers. He went to these ordinary, everyday people, and they changed the world with the gospel in just like 5 years. Just think about that. Like 5 years, if you go right before Jesus called them, whatever they were doing then, and fast forward 5 years, and just think about how radically their life has changed. I don't know if you've ever met somebody like in their 90s, somebody who's just 93 or 94, 95 years of age, and you sit down with them and you ask them to talk through all the changes they've seen in their life. Yeah, my grandfather, he died in his mid-90s. He died really old. And it was amazing to hear him talk about, he has vivid memories of World War II, through the civil rights movement in the 1960s in Vietnam, and then through the opulence of the 80s. And then my granddad, he had a Facebook account. He was like jiggy with it. Like in the late 90s or the early 2000s, I don't remember now when Facebook, but we'd Facebook each other. He went from World War II to full-blown internet. You think of the massive changes that he saw over his 90-something years of life. And these disciples, these everyday people that Jesus chose, from the moment they followed Jesus to his crucifixion, where they thought everything they believed was gone, to the resurrection, and then just the first few years into the book of Acts, when they get to see the gospel message of Jesus spreading everywhere and just constant revival. Man, the things that they experienced, and then ultimately every one of these people, except Judas, of course, dying for Jesus, being killed because of what they believed. Mark, we call them disciples. Mark either refers to them as the 12 or the sent ones. In the Greek language, it's apostoloi. It's where we get our word the apostles from. These are the 12 apostles. These are the 12 sent ones. So I just want to close with a question and a challenge. Here's a question. Do you consider yourself a follower of Jesus? It's a yes or no question. It's a binary question. Do you consider yourself a follower of Jesus? Here's a second question. If you're a follower of Jesus, one of the evidences that you are is he has sent you somewhere. He's displaced you and put you on a mission. Where has God sent you? Or maybe another helpful question would be, where is God sending you this week? One way to know you're an active follower of Jesus is if you've been sent somewhere on behalf of Jesus. Now, it's not always this way, but in my experience, and as I read through the apostles, typically Jesus sends us to places that make us uncomfortable, to people that make us uncomfortable, where we are the ones carrying the gospel message of love And it often, almost always, costs us something very dear to us. In the apostles, it cost them their absolute life. They actually laid down their life for Jesus. What's it going to cost you? Just as we close, we're about to go to our final song. I just want us to consider, as we look around our culture today, particularly right here in the United States, right here in Colorado, right here in Broomfield, I don't know that there's ever been a more keen time where the love and reconciliation power of Jesus needs to take effect. And we are ambassadors of Jesus. And sometimes that means we are speaking. And more often lately, particularly those of us in majority culture, I think it means we are listening and learning, but we are sent. We're sent. So just as we close, we're just going to give you another 20 or 30 seconds where you can pray. I'm not going to close in prayer. You can pray. Is there somebody God is sending you to this week? Is there somewhere God is sending you to this week? It might be very uncomfortable. It might cost you a great deal. I'm going to invite you to pray on that, and then we'll close in our song.
Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Shine upon and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen. Amen.
upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, your weeping, rejoicing. He is for you, 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 he is for you. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, and you're coming and you're going, and you're weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 he is for you. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen.
We're glad you joined us today. If you need anything at all, remember to email pastoralcare@dc2.me, and have a great week.